this morning from around the world. And this actually is a very diverse group of people together today. We have council members, we have civil society organizations, we have GEF agencies, evaluation office staff from the GEF here in Washington, our GEF secretariat colleagues. We have our scientific and technical advisory panel. We have a number of experts who are joining us from various agencies and partners who are interested in our KM work. We actually have a couple of professors who have offered to be our advisors to the process. So we have a very rich group of people coming together to discuss knowledge and learning for the GEF. I thank you for being here. Before we start, I have a couple of housekeeping announcements to make. First of all, as you can see from the agenda, we have quite a busy agenda and only 3 hours. So I am going to ask everyone to be brief in their statements, questions, etc. Anything we can receive in writing would be most appreciated after the event. But when you take the floor, please be considerate of everybody else who wants to say something so we can stick to the time. I will also ask presenters to also stick to their times as indicated on the agenda so we can go through the flow. Now, we are going to use the chat for people to raise their hand and tell us they want to speak. So if in chat, please indicate if you want to say something. I have my colleague, Ted, who is going to be monitoring the chat and telling us who is in line to speak when there's time to speak. And one last rule I'd like to say is that please keep your questions, any technical clarification questions, to the end of each presentation so we don't interrupt the presenters. And finally, there's translation available in Spanish and French. So if you're comfortable in either of those languages and not English, please use that translation function in Zoom. With that done, unless there are any burning questions about the process, I'd like to give the floor to our CEO, Carlos Manuel, to welcome you all to this wonderful event. Carlos Manuel, it's your turn.
Well, thank you, Jasmine, and greetings from San Jose, Costa Rica. I hope everybody's doing okay, fine. Extremely happy to participate in this event, and very nice to see a lot of friends and new faces, and extremely interested to join you all throughout the whole event. I'm not just gonna be here giving some initial remarks. I will be here for the whole event, hearing, and I'm putting a lot of attention to what you, the experts, can tell us, can guide us. And let me begin my remarks by sharing two personal stories that really illustrates the strategic importance of managing knowledge and understanding how do we disseminate learned lessons. In 1998, I was the Minister of Environment, long time ago, Environment of Costa Rica. We had a great idea on a new policy that will help us revert deforestation. We were beginning a GEF, I don't remember, it was a GEF 3 cycle. And we said, the first thing that we said, we shouldn't use the GEF resources in 3 or 5 projects. So we should do just one big project that can help us implement this policy. So our first challenge was, the GEF only gave us money to implement and to design projects for the specific conventions. And we were looking for just one single initiative that can, generate benefits across the different conventions. 25 years later, today, I'm super glad that we're talking with our donors in GEF aid in giving full flexibility to the countries to use their scarce resources. But back then, that was not the situation. We designed a project, and then we found out that the GEF grant money was not enough. So we knocked the door of the World Bank, and with this $48 million project, which was $10 million grant from the GEF. The other was a loan from the World Bank. Very interesting project. It was called Eco Markets. Basically, the idea was to fully implement and upscale the policy, which was payment for environmental services. We were going to pay farmers for the carbon services that the forestry, plantation, and agroforestry services. Agroforestry, trees in the coffee farm at the coffee level. We were very much influenced back then by the Kyoto Protocol. Very innovative idea, a large project, and we implemented. And that was the seed for a groundswell movement in terms of policy development, outreach, partnerships in Costa Rica. And today, a couple of months ago, I was extremely delighted to see that Costa Rica received the Earthshot Award. And I can link that reward with that project, what we did with the GEF 1998 Eco Market with the World Bank. Very successful project. For us in Costa Rica, it was a landmark initiative. And then the World Bank and the GEF said, this was a huge successful project. Let's move it to other countries. And they tried to do it in El Salvador. They tried to do it in Mexico and a couple of other countries. And they failed. They failed. And I was really excited. As a matter of fact, I was supporting them one way or the other, convincing ministers to do something similar in those other countries, because the problems that other countries had with relation to deforestation and forest conservation were very similar to Costa Rica. Unfortunately, none of the other of these initiatives in these other countries really transformed in a very successful project. And I was upset by the fact that, one, we didn't, the countries, the GEF or the World Bank, had a systematic approach in how to systemize lessons and bring these lessons in a very comprehensive, coherent manner to other countries, to other regions in a way that becomes attractive. Second, I was very surprised, upset, I don't know how to call it, but the GEF and the World Bank never asked us, the Costa Ricans, to go to those countries and tell the story about how successful that initiative was. And unfortunately, no other country in the world did a large blended finance project on PS like we did it in Costa Rica. Nevertheless, the GEF did a lot of PS projects, payment for environmental services, following on that initial experience in Costa Rica, but there was not a comprehensive, systematic approach. And I thought that we lost opportunities. I saw many projects. As a matter of fact, in the days of Monique Babur, the CEO, back then the CEO of the GF, she once consulted me and asked me to take a look to some PS related GEF projects. And I looked to them and I gave my opinion to her. And I said, these projects from the technical point of view are really good, but none of them are enhancing and creating policies and legal frameworks. If the project does not have this jurisdictional approach, which was the case in Costa Rica back then, you will never create a legacy, and those projects, the sustainability component of those projects will be extremely limited. And once more, I felt that the GEF was not there in terms of the capacities to really bring those very successful learned lessons. And I think that throughout time, these continue to be a huge challenge. Definitely, as I come into the GEF, I see much more of a good understanding of the importance of knowledge management. All of the agencies that we work with are experts and divisions and strategies on this very specific issue, and this is fine. My second experience was not long ago. I think it was 2016. I was working with, I was vice president for international policy at Conservation International. I had this very interesting South-South policy exchange program where I took ministers of environment from one region of the planet to another region to engage them in a very interesting exchange, learn lessons, exchange and knowledge management at the political level within the policy center at CI. And I convinced my donor back then to begin going down beyond ministers. And then I immediately identified, because I visited the GEF website and I saw that they got the country support program and that they did very interesting training and workshops. I said to myself, why don't we do an exchange with the GEF operational focal points? Let's bring them, let's bring a group of them to Costa Rica to see how Costa Rica has been using the GEF resources. So I talked with Claude Gascon and Pascal Martinez, 2016 from the GEF, and I organized this exchange with Africans GEF focal points. I brought 11 of them from Africa to Costa Rica. They were very well trained and prepared by the GEF within the African regional context, but none of them have ever been exposed or in contact with the country reality or the GEF reality in Latin America. And I brought these 11 Africans GEF operational focal point to Costa Rica. And it was like, you know, a bunch of children in a big toy store. They were, you know, they were running all over the place, asking all kinds of questions. They were delighted by the opportunity to have this exposure to the Costa Rican reality. It was very interesting. And I designed a very good 1 week long agenda and program. And on the first day, I said, Carlos Manuel, this is not going to work. I should let loose everybody here and flexibilize the agenda and let them, in a very organic manner, interact. My first takeaway out of that exchange was the Africans, as with the case of Costa Rica, they deal with exactly the same political, environmental, socioeconomic challenges, but they don't share, they don't communicate, they don't work within themselves. They deal with similar issues. Most probably they come with the same approaches, but unfortunately the trial and error and learning by doing is the main way by which they learn. I felt that there is not a systematic approach, a scientific approach to help them do that. And yes, I saw that the GEF was very good during in their regional workshops in training them, but it was more of a GEF-SEC, the operational focal point. How do we train you all to do the project, to the oversight, et cetera, et cetera. But nobody talk about how do we address the challenges, the environmental challenges. How do we design projects that addresses those environmental challenges and that can move the needle at the country level? Because those were issues. I was super delighted of that exchange. My frustration, and yes, at the end of the day, we came up with a brainstorm session where we all agree on the many different things that we can do together. Unfortunately, during those days, my CI days, I didn't have another donor that can help me do the follow-up on those South-South relationships. Francoise, Paola, and Jasmine will share throughout the day the importance that we're putting to the South-South exchanges beyond the regions, as we all understand that there's a big sense of political urgency to align development policies and investment policies from the private sector, align them to the Paris Agreement, align them to the new CBD framework, and with our aspirations to deal with pollution, chemical pollution, toxic pollution, waste, and everything else. So in conclusion, I want to share the burden of the feeling of responsibility I do feel myself as the lead person in this organization, because we just have 10 years to really begin moving this huge oil tanker in the right direction. And it is not a matter of putting more money. It's a matter of being smart. It's a matter of being able to really understand how do we maximize and optimize resources. And when we talk about resources, we only think about financial resources. Our biggest wealth, our biggest asset is the people engaged in all of these processes. And there's plenty of brain power, but also experience on how we address the big issues. We got just 1 decade to move things, this global consumption and production pattern, into a very different one that we have today. If we don't do that, most probably the GEF name will change from the Global Environment Facility to the Global Emergency Facility, because we will be dealing with big, complicated issues. So I want to transmit to all of you the sense of urgency, the need for action, the need to put knowledge management and lessons learned in the front line of everything we do, because it's not just asking for more money, providing more resources for more projects to the countries. It's an effort of, it is in the core of our sense of commitment and responsibility that we should be doing this. The GEF cannot do it by itself. We don't have the experiences and the capacities. And that is why we look at you all for your guidance, your assistance, your counsel, your wisdom on how you do this. And yes, we all in all of our different agencies has the mandate and the responsibility to do much better in this field. And altogether, I believe that we can really maximize and optimize the resources, but also, and most importantly, the opportunity. I look not just to very good projects that brings the learned lessons out of other regions, out of other years, because there's another element here which is important. The institutional memory at the country level is relatively weak, and we constantly deal with many issues. All of you who are in the front lines of of designing and implementing projects know how difficult it is to really engage on a sustainable manner with the government because of all the political changes, the natural and the not so natural political changes, which is a reality. That adds additional elements in what it is already very complicated world. So I'm very grateful to be here with all of you. I need to go to my following council meeting in June with some very clear guidelines, content, and I hope we got a little bit more than that to my council so they can be informed and supportive of what we will be working over here. So Jasmine, thank you so much for the opportunity, and thanks everybody here for the attendance and the willingness to work together in ways that we will feel very grateful with everybody, but also very satisfied by what we are doing over here, because this is plain and simple, giving add value to everything we do. We had a mandate to comply with, but also we had a sense of responsibility for those who are for those that their future has been compromised by our generation, particularly my generation. So I'm very happy to be here, and thank you, Jasmine.
Thank you so much, Carlos Manuel, for your thoughtful intervention. You identified key problems, especially at the country level. You suggested solutions. You offered ways to look into the issue and the challenge and how we can address them. We are grateful for your leadership. We are very happy that you are behind us in this mission to make sure that knowledge and learning fully integrated into everything we do at the GEF and across the partnership. Thank you so much. We hear you, and we will do our best to comply. And we are looking to our knowledge management advisory group to help guide and advise us as we move forward in this process. Now, as you know, this group hasn't met for the past 2 years to the unfortunate pandemic we've had a break in the way the group used to meet twice a year together with the council. So this is our first meeting in a while, and therefore I wanted to provide a quick update on where we are in knowledge and learning, so everybody is kind of on the same page. And then we can continue to talk about how we are going to address the issues that Carlos Manuel raised. So let me start the presentation here on the update of knowledge and learning in the GEF and plans for a new knowledge management strategy, or knowledge and learning strategy, we'd rather call it, for the GEF. So next, please. Yes, so Carlos Manuel actually summarized it very well. We are talking about knowledge and learning in the GEF, and the reason is because knowledge is a primary asset of the partnership, and it supports its strategic objectives. And therefore, we think it's an essential condition for GEF finance to make a lasting impact on the ground. We have two key objectives in knowledge and learning. One is to improve the quality and impact of GEF-funded projects and programs, and the other is to inform global, regional, and national policy dialogues so that we can help reverse global environmental degradation. And in order to achieve these two objectives, as Carlos Manuel pointed out, we are looking to enable and support systematic processes across our portfolio to generate, capture, and transfer critical knowledge so that our project design and portfolio management, policy development, resource mobilization efforts are more impactful and they are more knowledge-based, and we can build capacity and foster collaboration, innovation, and scale up of good solutions through demonstration and learning across the GEFSEC and the partnership, especially at the country level. Next, please. Now, in all of our efforts, obviously, there's a process we have been following, and you can see the timeline. Knowledge and learning in the GEF is not new, but it's not also very old either. The thinking around knowledge and learning started around 2010 when the GEF was thinking about a monitoring and evaluation policy. But things did not materialize until 2015 when the council welcomed the knowledge management approach paper, which was really the first strategic document we have on how to incorporate knowledge and learning into our investments and the way we function as a partnership. That was the point at which we actually formed a team within the Secretariat, and we started a number of pilot activities to test the waters, to build a knowledge and learning function within the Secretariat. A number of our agencies actually helped us kick this off the ground with generous support, because we didn't really have much resources within the Secretariat to do this. There was always knowledge and learning within the Secretariat, don't get me wrong. Our colleagues have always been involved in knowledge activities, in organizing events for knowledge exchange, etc. But it was done in a more ad hoc, opportunistic way. It wasn't done in a systematic way. So our effort began in 2015 to create a more systematic way, a more standardized way to integrate knowledge and learning. And as you can see on this timeline, a number of initiatives were put in place. And I would say one of the largest gains we have made over the years is that we have put in place requirements in our projects for incorporating knowledge and learning, and those activities are funded by the GEF. We have created the GEF Academy, which has put in place a number of e-courses that has enabled us, when we couldn't travel everywhere, to be able to share knowledge. We have a number of online knowledge bases. We have a new portal. I'm not going to go through all of that since many of you are actually aware, but what I want to say is that this is an ongoing process. And right now, for example, and I will talk to you a little bit more in detail later, we are involved in looking at South-South exchange and how we can create communities of practice for our focal points. We are looking at a strategy that can identify options for us for IT-based knowledge and learning systems for the GEF that are beyond projects and programs, but more at a corporate level, etc. Next, please. In all of the experiences we had over the 5 years, we have realized that the GEF is very well positioned to be a global knowledge generator and broker. And we think that the GEF partnership model actually offers a unique platform from which to gather, organize, and share experiences and expertise on global environmental issues. In fact, this KM advisory group is a case in point. It identifies the comparative advantage that the GEF has. We have strong synergy between knowledge and financing, as Carlos Manuel was indicating. Knowledge informs design of GEF investments and other investments outside of the GEF as well. And these investments in turn generate more knowledge about what works, what doesn't work, and subsequent investments can benefit from this knowledge. Secondly, the GEF has a convening partner as a partnership of 184 governments, 18 agencies, so many CSOs, and other critical actors in the global environment. We have a strong M&E policy independent of evaluation office. We are connected to science through our scientific and technical advisory panel. And therefore, we are in a position to inform and influence policymakers and take a lead role in setting the agenda for discussions on the global environment, also through our connections to the conventions that we serve. So next, please. We feel like we need to exploit this comparative advantage that we have and make sure knowledge generation, sharing, and learning have the proper place in everything we do. One of the first steps we have taken in this direction is that every GEF project and program is currently being designed as of GEF 6 and GEF 7 to internalize and invest in knowledge and learning. Every project and program proposal must include a knowledge management approach at both concept and design stages. And this knowledge management approach requires that the investments must learn from existing knowledge and build on good practice and lessons from past investments in the GEF or outside of the GEF, according to the topic. And every GEF project and program must implement this KM approach, report on the KN knowledge and learning deliverables and lessons learned, and share the knowledge generated during implementation. These are things that we see when we review projects for proposal approval at, we call them, you probably know the GEF terminology, the PIF stage and the CO endorsement stage. Our program managers check for these points at these two entry points in the GEF project cycle. We also invest, we meaning the GEF also invests in knowledge and learning directly through projects or project components specifically designed for knowledge generation, sharing, and learning. For example, this can be a large project like IW Learn, which is a $20 million investment in knowledge and learning in international waters, or it can be a component of an integrated approach program that creates a platform for sharing. For example, the Sustainable Cities platform that brings many countries together around the topic of sustainable transportation. Now, sustainable cities and transportation. So next, please. What I would like to show you is in the, if we were to look for knowledge and learning in the GEF business, where can we find it? And if you could continuously click, Nico, we can see that there are 3 levels. There is the operational and project level, there's the corporate and portfolio level, then there's the partnership level. Knowledge is everywhere, and it comes in all kinds of different forms and shapes. At the project and operational level, you can see what I was just discussing with you. All the KM approach requirements for project design and implementation show up in the various documents we collect from agencies when we actually process projects. And at the corporate level, we have a number of corporate activities that are designed for knowledge sharing. These are GEF Academy, GEF Kaleo, GEF Knowledge Days, good practice briefs, etc. We also have the country support program, specific events. We have our communications office creating all kinds of publications, our website, the results management and scorecard out of our results function. We constantly organize workshops, retreats, consultations, meetings to share information. We have COP side events, council meetings, tags, etc. And at the partnership level, of course, all of our agencies and all the other partners like IEO, staff, our donors, OFPs, they're all engaged in knowledge and learning, right? It's happening every day, everywhere. People are putting out publications, lessons learned. They're having all kinds of knowledge exchange events, etc. So this is a very complex and quite busy environment in which all this knowledge is flowing. Now, what we want to do is to make sure that this is being used. This is being useful. It is actually enhancing impact of GEF investments. Next, please. These arrows actually are showing in a simpler way, how their interaction is happening as well. Now, when we first started this journey in 2015, we had created the maturity assessment for the GEF in terms of knowledge and learning. And we were found at the time that we were at the developing stage, level 2, as you can see on this slide. We had an initial strategy work plan in place. There were some basic capabilities in the partnership that were systematic. KM roles were quite inconsistent, et cetera, et cetera. We feel that after 5 years, we were able to move closer to level 3, which is more of an established state. There is a vision. Partners are fully on board. KM is aligned with most of the corporate strategies. We do have some staff who have capacity. We have certain instruments in place. We are able to publish and produce some systematic pieces of knowledge work. However, we still have a ways to go. And we can certainly benefit from the experiences of our partners. We can certainly benefit from more reflection as to what's happening in our business. And we need to actually consolidate and, on all the things that we're doing to make sure what we're doing is generating real value and it's meaningful to our stakeholders, especially our countries. Next, please. Now, our evaluation office just recently conducted an evaluation as part of the OPS 7, because we are finishing our replenishment, 7th replenishment. There was a specific evaluation on knowledge and learning. And they have concluded that, and this is a very busy slide, but they have concluded a number of things, and I wanted to put them all out there so you have a record of it once you receive this presentation. But there's a document out there that's very resourceful. Now, the conclusion is that we have made a lot of progress in many areas, which is great to hear. However, of course, there are gaps and challenges. And the evaluation office has recommended that we should engage with the KM advisory group again and more consistently. And we should discuss a new strategy for knowledge and learning across the partnership with an action plan with common knowledge and management metrics. And they have recommended a technical solution that will strengthen the way we share and exchange knowledge across the partnership, the way we capture knowledge data, lessons, and good practices and share them. They also recommended that we could possibly enhance the knowledge management capabilities of our portal or build a new GEF knowledge exchange hub. So these were recommendations that were presented to council. And could you go next, please? And the council actually deliberated and agreed with these recommendations, and so did the GEF Secretariat and the management response to the evaluation. And the council made a decision in December 2020 that the GEF partnership should develop a clear KM strategy and should invest in a technical solution that strengthens the KM system. So these are very general decisions. However, we have now a mandate. We have a path in front of us. And we need to fill in the blanks of what it means to develop a KM strategy and what it means to invest in a technical solution. So we're looking to our partnership to help us fill in these blanks collectively together, working together. Next, please. Now, the challenges, of course, this road is full of challenges. And we had a discussion as a follow-up to this council decision. We had a discussion with our agencies to see what they think about this, because our agencies are They are the ones who implement our projects. They are the ones who are in close contact with our countries. And therefore, the flow of information really happens through the conduit of the agencies. And each agency has its own system of knowledge sharing, platforms, policies, knowledge and learning policies, etc. And in fact, some of them are going to speak here today. And during this meeting, actually, we had presentations from EBRD and World Bank and others to talk about their systems and their challenges. And what came out of this discussion were three key points. Agencies felt that there was a lack of systematic process, which is an agreement with what Carlos Manuel said, to extract, compile, share, and use knowledge and lessons emerging from GEF investments across the partnership. Now, the portal could potentially be a way to address this. We are working on it as we speak, of course, but that's something to be considered. Secondly, agencies felt that there was insufficient flow of knowledge among GEF investments. Again, what Carlos Manuel was mentioning. So, somebody in South Africa dealing with a similar project, needs to be able to speak with somebody in Asia dealing with a similar project and learn from each other. Currently, that flow of knowledge is not sufficient, right? And possibly the agencies could be the means by which we can have this exchange happen because they have representation in different parts of the world. So that was something that was discussed. Can this be done by an IT-based solution that was raised? Finally, application of existing knowledge to improve GEF investments. Now, this is more operational, and we wanted to make sure our agencies have clear guidelines as to how to do that. And this was an ask coming out in this discussion. Next, please. These were some of the solutions, as I just mentioned, that could be considered for these three key problems. So enhanced GEF portal, IT-based knowledge and learning platform, and better KL guidelines and training for agencies. Next, please. Now, of course, after we've talked to the agencies, we've also internally had a brainstorming with Carlos Manuel leading on this issue, and we discussed how all of this could also link to the GEF 8 replenishment process, because the new replenishment actually has a lot of knowledge and learning embedded into it, and we want to make sure that all of these issues are aligned. And we prepared a fact sheet for our donors, and we also took into consideration that knowledge and learning could be a key lever for transformation and for scale up within the GEF 8 mission and beyond. So these are the steps we have followed to date. And next, please. Which brings us to today. So discussion with you, with this group, reconvening this group, and is yet another step in the process towards addressing these challenges. This is a community around knowledge and learning, and we are grateful that you are here. And I just want to point out that this is an informal vehicle for collaboration and consultation. There is no, specific work plan. There is no hierarchy. This is a meeting of equals, a meeting of people interested in helping the GEF. And it's a sounding board to achieve the objectives set originally in our GEF KM approach paper. Membership is voluntary and it's open. And we are grateful, actually, this year, we are able to have more people joining, and especially CSOs, because of the ability to connect online. Before, these meetings were being held at council meetings in Washington, D.C. So only the people who were already there could be joining. Even though we broadcasted widely over the internet, webcasted, it was still somewhat limited. But now we have a lot more CSOs here, which is great. What I would like to do now is I would like to, I think this was my last slide for this session, Nico. Yes, this is the rest of it. I'd like to, if you don't have any specific questions for me, since we have limited time, I would like to move on to the next session, which is where our presenters have kindly agreed to join us to tell us about their journeys. Because I just told you about where we are, what our journey has been up till now. And we are at a crossroads where we are going to now embark upon a strategy. But before we can do that, we want to hear from others who have already gone through that process, right? facing similar challenges. So we have invited some wonderful colleagues from 3 institutions who are partner to the GEF. And I would like to have us start hearing from them. And after their presentations, we are going to have a discussion session where we can then have all kinds of ideas and questions raised. So if you would allow me then, unless there are any burning issues or questions, I would like to move ahead. Okay.
There is one question.
There's one question. Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, from Saeed. He said, is there a mechanism for monitoring and controlling the impact of GEF projects on local population and ensuring that KM is taken into consideration during the implementation of projects?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. My answer is that yes, we do have a monitoring and evaluation system for the GEF, which is implemented by our agencies during project implementation. That's annual reports, project implementation reports, and we have midterm reviews and terminal evaluations. So there is actually a system. However, knowledge management is not being tracked in the way other performance indicators are being tracked. And we do not have yet in place targets against which we can track knowledge and learning. And that's one of the things that this knowledge management strategy work is going to look at. We are going to see if we can develop a couple of knowledge and learning indicators for the GEF. What could be the metrics which we could track on the ground for knowledge and learning, and how we can incorporate that into our monitoring and evaluation processes. There's one thing, though, that agencies are required to report right now, are lessons learned. As I mentioned, we have a portal, and it is expected that agencies, as lessons become available, upload these lessons into our portal for capturing of lessons learned and then analysis and sharing. But that's just starting. Again, it's in its infancy, and we are learning from the process. Thank you. Any other clarification questions, or may I move forward?
Jasmine, it's Carlos
Yes.
Manuel.
Carlos Manuel, go ahead.
So that's a very important question, and this is something that we all need to talk a lot. But most importantly here, the most relevant element is to really share within ourselves the positive experiences that may be out there, and we at the GEF don't necessarily know, on what the agencies and the partners are doing in terms of measuring impact with regards to knowledge and lessons learned. This is something that, as you said, Jasmine, in your presentation, we need to have a cross-cutting element in everything that we do that brings this element up front to us. Otherwise, we will never be able to capitalize, maximize, optimize the possibilities to learn from projects and build on that. That's one element. The other element that I think is important is that sometimes there's a natural tendency to do the knowledge management on a very vertical base. We with the agencies and the secretariats, but there's a lot of experience and knowledge at the country level with the operational focal points, with the executing agencies. I mean, there's a lot of others, extremely important actors and partners at the country level, in and outside the government. We engage a lot with the civil society and the private sector. So we need to look on how we bring these horizontal approaches that we normally use and make them more, this very vertical, and make them more horizontal, as we understand that the base of knowledge is at the ground level. That is something that I believe is really important, and this is a great opportunity to do the both approaches, the top down and the bottom up as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Carlos Manuel. And with that, I'd like to move on to our next session, which will look at the agency experiences.
Yes,
and first,
we have two hands up. Sorry, got two people with hands up.
We are not going to be able to actually accommodate that because we do need to move forward. But if you could, whoever would like to say something, if you could include your question in the chat, we will get to it later. And if we somehow cannot get to it this time around because we have such a big agenda, we will write the response in writing. We will respond in writing. So please put it in the chat. Thank you so much. I appreciate your cooperation in this because we do have to move on. So George Zezinete, who is coming to us from the Green Climate Fund, he is the head of knowledge and change management at the Green Climate Fund. As you know, the GEF and the Green Climate Fund have just made agreements to work together. I mean, we have always worked together, but right now in a more formal way to cooperate and collaborate. And we are very grateful that George was able to come here today to speak to us, even though I know he's had some family emergencies. And we are so grateful that you could come here and share the experience that the fund had in developing knowledge management strategy and implementing it. George, without further ado, and you have all received George's bio, his excellent background. I'm not going to go into it. George, if you would like to say a few words about yourself and then start your presentation, I'd be grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasemin. Thank you, Carlos Manuel, for your speech and welcoming us here today, and colleagues for your interest and engagement. This is definitely one of those rare occasions when we get really excited to join another virtual meeting, because this is really something that we all feel so passionate about. The topic, and particularly being here today and talking about GCF experience is something I feel very excited about. And of course, there are no right or wrong approaches. There are different approaches when it comes to managing knowledge in our organizations. And of course, we have no ambition that this is going to be a presentation of what the good or the perfect knowledge management system in management look like, but it's rather our way of doing it. Next, please. So in my brief presentation today, I will talk briefly about our strategy, the theory of change. I will spend a few minutes elaborating on the highlights of 2021, some of our initiatives we're working on, and the lessons learned from deployment and implementation. So can we have the full screen, please? So here is what we put in our knowledge management strategy as the overarching principle. If lessons learned from GCF investments, operations, and its partners are shared, then GCF will enable countries to accelerate efforts toward low-emission, climate-resilient development pathways, because good practices will be leveraged and GCF operations will become more effective, efficient, and adaptable. Now, every word here has been debated and has been a consensus when crafting this statement. And one part I would like to emphasize here is enabling countries to accelerate efforts toward low-emission, country-resilient development pathways. Because you all know we are the world's largest climate fund, and there is a lot of resources that we channel through. But of course, we are not a pass-through mechanism. We're not an institution that receives money and gives it to the agencies, but we're here to empower countries to build their capacities. And when I say countries, these are our national designated authorities, but also country-driven approaches, entities that implement projects on the ground. And I know when I say it in the GEF context, there are a lot of similarities because we both work and engage with country actors and direct access entities, people on the ground. And this is basically why we're created. This is why we as a KM need to create knowledge, codify and diffuse so that we can reach the ultimate goal of the organization. And then we have to objectives below our mission statement. That's an internal one and an external one, teams of excellence in climate investment leadership. Of course, there is a lot that we can talk about climate investments and how much money is being spent there. But again, a lot depends on how you spend this money, how you invest, what are the good practices, and how we can catalyze a lot of knowledge out there, not only and curate, not only create it as a solo actor. I'm not gonna go like read word for word because you will have this presentation after the meeting. So I'll move on to the next slide to focus on the theory of change. The actual theory of change, that is the basis for the strategy, was developed with the intention to have a measurement, or rather a set of measurements, whether or not we're on the right track, whether or not we know how we can contribute to the mission of the fund. So we came up with what you see now on the screen with a theory of change, again, with two pillars. The internal side, concerned with the teams of excellence, and in the mission statement, I read efficiency, effectiveness, and adaptability. And efficiency starts with internal operations. So we need to make sure that our teams are at their full capacity, that not only we have the right resources, or rather right number of people equipped with the right resources, but they also have the right tools. And we're not talking just about the digital tools here in this case, but rather equipped with the knowledge, equipped with the standard operations procedures, or with the technical knowledge and expertise, so that they can perform their duties. And if they don't have that, they know where to go and who to ask, because we can't know it all, but we can know who to ask when we need it. So that's basically the underlying principle here. And then we're moving on to the strengthening stakeholders' capabilities to scale up impactful and transformative climate investments. And again, focuses here come on our partners. We're an organization of about 300 plus people, with 3 small independent units, and with one office headquartered in South Korea. Of course, we can't implement everything from Korea, and of course we rely on the stakeholders. So that's why the external factor or external pillar is such a central part of our strategy. And of course, here we go, and again, you can read more details here, but there is a lot about establishing communities and learning platforms, a lot about capacity building. Some of you may be familiar that we not only fund large projects and give loans, but we also give readiness support to the countries. And one of the 4 pillars within the readiness support is actually knowledge management. So we give countries the necessary expertise, but also we request their submission so that we can consider funding them in their readiness proposals. So we then, of course, had to think through and see, what barriers, what governance structure had to be put in place, what barriers and mitigative factors could be also brought into the picture to have a holistic picture in terms of implementing the strategy. And on the governance part, awareness and motivating leadership, or rather motivational leadership. But for leadership to be motivational, they first need to be motivated to be on your to be supportive, and then performance based management, making sure that people are assessed at least partially or at least somehow on their collaboration in knowledge management aspects. Oops, I wasn't okay. And we can actually move to the next slide here. And then, resources, planning, and control. So some of the highlights for 2021, and I'll start with the taxonomy. We were able to finalize our taxonomy for the organization, and it comes in 4 different forms. It comes in a handbook form. That's something, colleagues have really enjoyed, because that's a tangible, product. They go through, they say, oh, by the way, we need to add more. So far, it's been just increasing at a really fast pace. But that's not the most exciting part. The exciting part here is that we've been able to also give definitions to one of the 3 pillars, which is the institutional part. The programming pillar has been expanding, and we're planning on reaching out to other climate, or rather other similar institutions in the climate finance landscape, to make sure that this taxonomy is well socialized and benefits from the expertise and experience of the other actors in the field as well. And this is also now being introduced as an annex to submission, funding submission to GCF. So in order to submit a funding proposal with its annexes, we will now engage with our stakeholders to see if what we have prepared is ready to be launched very soon. CRM is another exciting project we embarked on this year. This is constituents management system. We did not have it, but we also realized that and there is a lot of knowledge out there within the organization that goes uncaptured. So this was really focus for part of our work. Knowledge sharing forums. This is something very important. We believe not only sharing what we do with other organizations is important, but learning from that. We've benefited from it in the past, and we're committed to engaging with our partners to learn not only about knowledge management and sharing, but also the substance that we produced through our sector experts. Knowledge products, digital onboarding, something that is a huge undertaking, trying to codify all the knowledge in the organization in digitalizing, so that when every new person joins the organization, there is a online repository of all this knowledge where people can go through and go through the program and be ready to roll up their sleeves in a relatively short period of time, as opposed to waiting for colleagues to really teach them everything on the job. Next, please. And we will, I think I've covered taxonomy to some extent. Happy to answer some questions about it, but at the moment, this is what it is. This is a breakdown of the digital onboarding program, gives you an idea how extensive the work has been and how much knowledge is captured and codified through 20 hours of, I believe, 29, close to 30 different modules. And we have 3 different pathways: core orientation, functions of the Secretariat, and climate management. Next, please. Lessons learned. And this is an area where we are just starting to dive deep, because our portfolio is not as mature as some of our partner organizations. We're a relatively new organization, so we do not have decades of experience in implementing projects, but nevertheless, we've realized that we have to have the tools in place beforehand, whether it's starting with a submission proposal template or the reporting guidelines. All of that needs to be in place. Otherwise, we realized whenever we wanted to pick examples for anecdotal evidence or examination, we need to have the tools, the basic tools in place. And for that, we started working with the senior management team. We wanted to socialize the concept with our colleagues that we will be working with very closely. So consultations were held. A key principle here is whenever you talk to your stakeholders, avoid jargons, avoid KM language and theories. That's not going to go a long way. But when we demonstrate the evidence how this can be beneficial to them, the buy-in is much greater. And of course, the key learning from an early stage of lessons learned approach we're developing is that it really needs to be aligned with the organization strategy and working program, because there are so many within each organization strategies or sub-strategies or plans or whatever we call them. Unless you really put an effort in synchronizing and harmonizing them, it's going to be really difficult to have your key stakeholders on board, because there will be always something that you haven't taken into account, whether it's your communication plan, whether it's the overarching strategic plan of the fund or ICT plan. You will put in all the brilliant ideas, but if these are not aligned with the other strategies and other developments of the organization, there's very little we as KM teams can achieve. So I don't think, again, this is something you guys have not realized so far, but this is really fresh on my mind as we're going through this phase just now. So definitely an re-aha moment after some months of collaboration with colleagues. So that's in a nutshell where we stand at the moment. And as I said, this is just our journey, and we know there's a lot we have to do, but we're happy to be where we are, realizing that we only started the portfolio when I first joined in 2018. So it's been less than 4 years now, and 2 years of COVID. So in a very interesting times when we're still navigating our way through and learning how to adapt to this new reality. So happy to take your comments and questions when the time comes. Thank you, Yasemin and colleagues.
Thank you so much, George. It seems like you have accomplished, you and your team, a lot in a matter of a few years. We look to further engage with you to learn more about all the details. But thank you for this overview. It was super helpful. If there are no very specific technical clarification questions about George's presentation, I'd like to move to ADB, because we're already about 15 minutes delayed in our program. Without further ado, I think I would like to invite ADB's Knowledge Advisory Service Center, the head of ADB's Knowledge Advisory Service Center, Dr. Susan Roth, to speak. Susan is actually a medical professional, comes from a very extensive medical training. You've seen her bio, but she also has had a very distinguished history at ADB, working on knowledge and learning. And she's been leading their strategy development and implementation. And I'm sure she's going to have very interesting things to say about their journey. Go ahead, Susan, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. It's already 10:30 in Manila in the evening, so you can imagine how passionate and dedicated we are to knowledge management. I'd also like to introduce my colleague, Jane Caranga San Jose. She has been basically the institution in knowledge management, has been in our center for many years already. She's also here with us today. We had an IFI community of practice meeting yesterday. So those who were there, George and Margot was there, they have seen this presentation already. So of course, we're trying to give it a new twist to it. But what we wanted to share is really our 9 learnings from the ADB knowledge management journey. Like, what have we learned? How did we make knowledge management now a key asset of the bank? And as you said before, we need to make sure that knowledge is part of the balance sheet. So that's what we want to share with you today. And before I start with that, I want to give a little bit of provocation. And maybe that's something we should work together on. And as you know, G20 is coming up every year. Next year it is actually hosted by Indonesia, There are many environmental challenges there, obviously. They will have to tackle them. So maybe we should work with G20 and say, well, you have established and you're working on the global financial architecture, but maybe now it's time to establish and set up a global knowledge architecture, because we do need to harmonize KM practices across development organizations. There is a lot of replication. We need to really enhance how lessons are learned and how research and development is actually focused or should be focused on societal issues and align with principles for knowledge management. So that's something to think about. Maybe we can collaborate on that. So I'm starting with some kind of inspiration or a call for action, but let's go now into IDB's knowledge management. So we had a really a 50-year journey in knowledge management since our beginning, but it was really, to be honest, always a bit more transactional. We used to count knowledge products and our knowledge events, and that was about it. So this new knowledge management action plan, which is basically like our strategy, you're not allowed to call a strategy because only our corporate strategy is allowed to be called strategy. Our new knowledge management action plan moves now from counting knowledge products to actually looking at what kind of solutions do we provide to our member countries. And I think in the beginning, we heard a lot about the need for countries to compare and look at different solutions. So that's what we want to provide. The second thing is we really want to connect people and collaboration. We thought in the past it's all about digital tools and having platforms and find stuff in our systems, which is still difficult. But at the end, it's really actually about linking people and enhancing this collaboration. We want to make sure that our knowledge is more relevant and of higher quality, that we strengthen actually the relationships within our teams and our partners, that we optimize the staff learning. And last but not least, the most important thing, that we put knowledge on the balance sheet. So how have we done this and what are the lessons we have learned? So the first and most important one is that knowledge management is all about change management. So when we designed our new knowledge management plan and the implementation, we really borrowed the tricks and the insights from change management. And that is one of our recommendations also for the Global Environment Facility. So there are 8 takeaways on how we did this. The number one is we really defined the why. What's the business value of knowledge management? And probably for the GEF, it's about being that knowledge broker, because you work with so many different partners. And maybe it is also about harmonizing that kind of knowledge curation and sharing. The second one, we really created a very participatory process and a lot of excitement on what's in for them, for everybody, on sharing knowledge and being part of this knowledge management. The third one was really about creating the strategic ambiguity, and that was common ground, like what's in for, you know, the hardcore bankers in our organization or the private sector, and what's in for those who work on lower developed countries and the middle income countries. So everyone could find something that is useful for their core business. We connected it with many different reforms in the bank. So that was also very important. And the fourth one was we joined other change processes. For example, the digitalization, the digital transformation process. I think that's another important thing, especially maybe also for you, is what kind of data can we actually harvest and harness from our project work, and how can we use that and make that a core asset of our knowledge. The fifth part was really we needed to understand our stakeholders and of course also point of resistance. And I want to flag to you, and I don't know if you will have this issue, some people are saying there's a great opportunity now with COVID, if we think of green recovery and so on, but you know, reality maybe it's very different, right? Only 11 or 12% of financing that was given or that was provided by countries to stabilize economic situation actually went into green finance and looked at environmental issues. So maybe we do have a lot of resistance going forward. Maybe countries do want to have mainly money and not necessarily knowledge. So that's something we have to look at. The sixth part is we offered very easy packaged and very useful knowledge services that were useful for our staff. The seventh tool we used for change management was really improved branding and marketing. And the eighth one was we developed good measurements and showed quick results and outputs. And I think an important part is how you create recognition and awards for your own teams. So for us, a lot was about documenting what kind of knowledge work they have done, our staff. We're launching a book next week, which summarizes key knowledge solutions that we have provided. We are providing training and career progression opportunities for staff who are involved in knowledge management. So for example, we're right now doing the ISO 3041 training on knowledge management. Everyone who participates in that from our knowledge focus gets a certificate. We have done extensive training on knowledge management with IMA. So all of these things are incentives for staff to join knowledge management and take that seriously, because there are career opportunities inside and outside the bank. Another important aspect of change management was that we applied foresight. And maybe that's another thing which is important for you. We developed scenarios for ADB and looked at various assumptions, at the uncertainties, and that helped us to understand what kind of organization do we want to be? What kind of knowledge solution provider do we want to see? And that also helped us to develop a narrative for ourselves. I heard earlier that you were talking about the oil tanker that has to be moved. That was a narrative we had around 4 years ago, and that changed now into speedboats. So how do we create more speedboats that can actually operate a lot faster and be a lot more agile? We have tested future thinking and foresight with client countries, so that helped us also to get an understanding of what they want from us as an organization that provides knowledge solutions and is a knowledge broker. The second lesson learned was really we had to create common ground. And I think that is probably even more difficult for you because you have so many different partners. So we created this core team which developed this knowledge management action plan through interviews and workshops, and we had task forces. That was all supplemented by analysis, by outreach consultations with IFIs, with research institutes, academia. I see also Kim Delkire here, and of course, lots of dialogues with our board. So the third most important recommendation is make it as participatory as possible. The third one is really we needed to have a very clear point of view of what we want to be. George has talked about theory of change. We have also applied a theory of change, and that helped us to identify the core pillars of our knowledge management plan. Our goal is to become the leading and trusted regional knowledge organization in Asia Pacific. And by doing that, we improve development results in the region, and we inform policy programs, projects, and operations. So this year of change led to 3 pillars in our knowledge management action plan, which have altogether 10 straightforward actions and principles. And then when we did that, and it was a corporate document, and you probably have a similar impression then, is how do you now implement this? I understand you have around 100 staff, so it's maybe a lot easier, but then you have many partner organizations and partner organizations you work with. We have 3,000 staff members and many more consultants and partners. So we realized we needed to distribute knowledge management. And I hand over now to Jane to explain a bit how we did this and walk us through the next 3 lessons learned.
Thanks, Susan. So when we said that the KMAP was done in a participatory manner, we were able to nominate 88. I think the next slide will show 88 KM focals across the bank. And you will see that they cut across different position levels from different locations as well as different department types. That makes it a good representation of everyone in the bank. I think the important thing that we did here is that when we prepared the terms of reference of these focals, we co-developed these terms of reference with them, with the idea that they should be allocating 10% of their time to be dedicated to KM. The most important work they are doing here is really to lead the development and implementation of KM department roadmaps. While we have KMAP at the corporate level, at the department level, our focals were able to lead the preparation of department roadmaps. And in doing so, the next slide will show you how much that kind of participation in preparing those roadmaps happen. The roadmaps really identified priority KM issues and problems priority KM solutions, resources needed, and what other departments can offer to support the preparation. We have 500 staff who participated in the surveys, all the 25 departments doing their own doing the roadmaps, 13 staff surveys and 6 focus group discussions were held as well as user journey workshops, because we do believe that the most important part of the preparation of these action plans is those consultations and those conversations that are needed to surface. And as we have realized, the feedback that we get from the departments is, we didn't know that we were actually doing KM already. Our next slide will show that it is important at this point, after 3 action plans since 2004. We had 2009 to 2011, 2013 to 2015, and unprecedentedly, our current roadmap is now really looking at very concrete results framework. We need to measure our progress. And as you shall see, we are anchoring our knowledge outcomes with the business objectives of ADB, and therefore, we linked it closely with ADB's corporate results framework. There are 13 indicators in the CRF that are referring to knowledge. The most important ones are 2. First is really measuring the use of ADB and quality of ADB's knowledge through an external perception survey. And the second one is really measuring how ADB staff see ADB as a learning and knowledge organization. Originally, we were using the Most Admired Knowledge Enterprise Framework, or the MAKE. We have shifted to APQC's Knowledge Management Capability Assessment Test, because we have seen that the rigor of doing these tests and the dimensions being measured, granular as they are, really correspond to the pillars of our KMAG on people and process, people and culture, process, and relationships. The next lesson that we have learned is that 2021 was a very good time for us, and we ushered last March in the approval of the KMAP, so we needed to build momentum and interest in the plan. So coincidentally, in the same year, in September of this year, we held a knowledge forum. It is not only designed for external participants, but we included in that forum knowledge sharing sessions and workshops to train all our KM focals on basic KM fundamentals and good practices from outside. And we have learned a lot in terms of the 3 pillars of our KMAP. We have very renowned speakers, including Maya Shankar, who emphasize nudging behaviors, because we see KMAP really as a change management process. We also had good practices in KM shared with us by Ed Hoffman, who works with NASA, and our plenary leaders panel really emphasizing the importance of collaboration and knowledge to respond to the pandemic. Our next slide also shows that in terms of sustaining the interest and on knowledge management, it's really to understand the needs of our clients. And we see this as a funnel. While we are aligning our ADB Strategy 2030 with the national development plans of our developing member countries, and anchoring and defining these as a way to engage with our countries through our country partnership strategies, we wanted to sustain and help support our lending and our operations with effective knowledge. And that is where, in the preparation of our country knowledge plan, we introduce that step of holding important knowledge consultations with relevant stakeholders. This is the venue wherein we bring together our knowledge departments, operations departments, because we believe that an integrated approach to complex problems and challenges that our DMCs face is very important. And to operationalize those knowledge outcomes that support the strategic objectives for each country, we then link them into our ICPM, the Interim Country for Performance Monitoring Report, that really outlines what ultimately will be our knowledge products and services to support our lending operations. So I'll turn this over back for our next lessons to Suzanne.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jane. So you can see the combination of quick wins at the country level. I think from your comments in the chat, I can see the demand, especially from the civil society organizations, on what's in from knowledge management for the knowledge sharing actually for local communities, and how do we share that knowledge back. So that's where actually we also started with our country dialogues and country work. So now back to the organization. What we also realized is that in an increasingly complex system like we operate in, right? Our products are becoming increasingly complex, our lending or our grant products. We need to have more distributed governance. It doesn't help to have top-down and centralized approaches to knowledge management. We need to understand how different teams in the bank, how different the country teams and different departments actually operate. So to have some level of oversight, we are creating the Knowledge Governance Group, which is a senior level body, which reports then directly to the vice presidents and the president and our board. And they have now data that we have generated over the last year and will continue to generate to understand and ask the questions: how is critical knowledge managed? How do we prioritize our critical knowledge for our business? And how are resources allocated? Because I think that was often the elephant in the room and still is. Every organization wants to do great knowledge management and no one wants to spend on it. So that's where we are now holding also our own management accountable and saying, well, if you want to be the knowledge provider of the region, you have to make sure you actually provide resources for it and you have some focus. The eighth part is really the number 8. The 8th lesson is really about patience, perseverance, and walking the talk. And I think one important part there is really be persistent with the need for more resources. We are now working on a new job architecture across the bank, which will include knowledge management capabilities in all job roles and families. We are creating a job family for knowledge management. We are enhancing how we are building the capabilities and competencies. And of course, there is a re-energized community of practice across the bank. But more than inside, we also actually were very, very daring, because we said, well, if we can change our own organization, we can actually offer this as a service to our government counterparts and partners. So we did work, and we're still working with the National Economic Development Agency in the Philippines, and we are helping them to develop their knowledge management strategy, set up their knowledge management unit and their innovation unit. And we think that is probably the holy grail to knowledge management. If we can build institutional capacity in our government counterparts to manage knowledge and not just ours, but the knowledge they create themselves and they get from partners, and to share that in their own agencies, across agencies, and with other governments. And the 9th lesson is probably the most important lesson, and that is we have to enjoy what we are doing. We are working all very hard, but let's make that fun. And to make it fun and to create also spaces outside of our bureaucratic red tapes, we created the ADB Knowledge and Innovation Hub, which is now a space for experimentation, because we realized, and thanks also to Ede, who is in this call here too, who was also at the Knowledge Forum and is one of our advisors. I think what we see is it's all about recombination of new and old knowledge. And to do that, you need to actually understand innovation management tools, effective collaboration, the power of teams, how we manage high-performing teams, and make sure people can work with each other across countries, organizations, and partners. And so that's another important step in our journey, the Knowledge and Innovation Hub. And please, if you want to learn more, follow us on LinkedIn. It's the ADB Knowledge and Innovation side. We also have a YouTube side where we started to do TEDx-style talks, which share the knowledge and bring faces to our experts in ADB. And with that, we'll stop here and wait for your questions. And we hope you enjoyed the 9 lessons from ADB's knowledge management journey.
Thank you so much, Susan, for this very impressive presentation. I am so, I would say, pleasantly surprised and also, very happy that ADB has taken this on very, very seriously, and your team clearly has responded, very effectively. You have hit all of the key points, the challenge points, the pain points, and come up with lessons for us to learn from in your presentation. I'm very grateful for that. I'm also happy to hear that your Knowledge Forum included Ed Hoffman. He actually also participated in this KM advisory group at the beginning of our journey and gave us really good advice. And some of our KM approach actually benefited from his guidance. So that's fantastic. And Ede is here, is going to speak soon. I hope you can stay for the discussion period, because I'm sure there'll be very interesting comments about your presentation and some questions. I am going to move on to the third presentation now. I apologize if there are any burning questions, but we have to move on because it's getting very late for ADB and others. So if we can actually invite Maria Elena to speak on behalf of IFAD. Leniara, our actually original speaker, is unable to join us. She has a conflicting event, but Maria Elena is going to make the presentation. And you have already seen her bio, so I'm going to skip that. But she's also a very experienced knowledge management professional at IFAD. So Maria Elena, without further ado, please, I'm inviting you to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin, and thank you everyone for having us here today. Unfortunately, yes, Lenyana, we have a knowledge management retreat right now, so she had to attend to that, and it was just at the same time. So yes, the IFAD KM strategy, a journey. It was a journey both in the development of the strategy, which took, its time and consultation and, preparation. And it doesn't finish with the strategy, obviously, and it's in the implementation that, you have to be, and what, our biggest message to you is that, you need to be flexible, agile. And I think it was the ADB who said, you really need to make it a change management a strategy. Ours has already, gone through different business models, 3 different associate vice presidents who have led it, that all had differing views, changing the way we work and communicate given the COVID situation, increase in decentralization. For example, IFAD was a very HQ-based organization here in Rome. In the last few years, we are now up to 45%, in the field. So, things change and the strategy needs to be resilient enough to adapt to the various changes. And I think we have done a pretty good job so far in, we have been able to use the basic principles, the guardrails that we had set and the objectives, obviously, to be able to adapt to, the different situations. So next slide, please. In developing the strategy, this was actually the second strategy. And we learned from the first strategy, while there was progress made in improved ICT infrastructure, we actually had knowledge management embedded in the performance evaluation system of our staff. Like the ADB, we also had job families for knowledge management, but it was still, a thousand flowers bloom approach. There were many scattered initiatives, and there wasn't, the coherence and the systematic approach to knowledge management. So that's why we found the need to go on, to develop a second strategy, and together with consultation from various experts, Chris Collison, Steve Lewinsky, and many in-house consultations. It was a very participatory consultative process in, let's say, reaching the final product. We did a review of our own, KM at IFAD, what it had gone through in the last 10 years. In the previous strategy, we did structured interviews with all staff members. We did a desk review. We actually had a few workshops where the staff actually were able to place themselves on the KM maturity model. I think, Yasmin, you were describing something similar, benchmarking studies, organization. After all of this, we found that, let's say, bundled challenges that you see on the screen, that we, needed to build a better, solid knowledge base, being more strategic and prioritizing the knowledge that we were developing, like, instead of the thousand flowers blooms, to, what products do we need? What are the specific topics that we need to tackle? Where are the knowledge gaps? And obviously here leveraging knowledge through partnerships. And I think we're hearing here how important they are even in developing the knowledge management strategies, because I see, the similarities and common challenges and common approaches in our three presentations, and it's really, it's amazing. Another big challenge that we saw was, the use of the knowledge, and I think that was also hit upon by our previous presentations. We had been producing a lot, but it was hard, to find knowledges. They were scattered. They were not tagged properly. So going back to the taxonomy of the GCF colleague, and a better curation of the lessons learned. They were scattered again in different documents, in different repositories. So finding a way to make them more accessible and, above all, making them used in order to improve our operations. And the other one was around, the culture of learning within the organization, the incentives for staff to share knowledge, and having, and above all, the most important is having the senior management buy-in and being behind the strategy. Yes, we can move on to the next one. So after we had identified our main challenges, we obviously we tried to address them in the strategy with the specific action plan that addressed the three main, let's say, groups of challenges. So the main objective was to improve how we actually generated, accessed, shared, and used our knowledge to achieve, and I think here we are all again on the same page, better results, higher impact, and to influence both global, regional, and country policy dialogues, and to influence also our partners to invest in the principles that IFAD invests in. So the main features of the strategy is that the learning had to be very evidence-based. So here again, data management and based on solid evidence and data, and no more trivial and anecdotal evidence or like knowledge products. The focus on people, again, knowledge is people, and I think we've said that time and again in the previous presentations. So a lot of the actions or the activities that we focused on was building better knowledge communities of practice, working on the incentives, recognizing the contributions that staff who actually went the extra mile to share their knowledge, South-South cooperation, learning routes, etc. And like the other strategies that we've seen here, and this was new compared to the previous strategy, it was built on a theory of change where we articulated the actions to address the underlying challenges. Next slide. And again, we, as I mentioned before, we had the three main action areas, because we have the action plan that was actually annexed to the strategy to address the specific challenges that we saw in the lead up to the strategy that we identified. And again, the idea is for the knowledge to be transformed into results. So setting a strategic knowledge agenda, again, prioritizing, and we've tried to do that in setting some processes that we, proposing a knowledge product to understand who our audience is, what are the main messages, how actionable a certain product can be, and what are the dissemination channels. We've also done some knowledge gap exercises to see where we should be focusing our resources on, because again, at the end of the day, we have limited resources, so where should we be focusing? And the, working with partnerships. And here I think we've also made some good progress so far. Again, the knowledge uses, we've tried to improve some ICT systems. We've tried to also work on, let's say, building the capacity of those who actually are writing and curating the lessons to see what makes a good lesson, how to communicate a good lesson or a good practice. And finally, the enabling environment incentives. That comes up a lot in all our KM discussions here in IPAD. Developing capacities, providing the training for KM. We also developed a resource center where there's all kinds of resources that can enhance your KM capacities, and that's open to all our staff. And to another let's say important activity in our action plan was to actually ensure that crucial knowledge is retained. As I was mentioning, there have been a lot of people moving around because of decentralization, a lot of people retiring for natural causes. So and not to lose the critical and valuable knowledge that was accumulated throughout the years, we put in place a knowledge retention program where it's not just about the handover note at the end of the career of a professional who has been here for 25 years. It's more of a thought out process where there are interviews throughout a period where there is a selected group of people that interview that person and are able to ask questions in a very safe environment and are able to, let's say, extract or absorb as much knowledge as possible from staff leaving the organization. So next slide, please. We have it. Okay. Quickly, 2 years down the road, as I mentioned before, it has gone through lots of changes, even if it's only been 2 years. There has been change in management and, again, all the different changes I mentioned before. So what we've learned is that the importance of the enabled environment and above all, championship by senior management, and that has been fundamental in moving forward the knowledge agenda and in being resilient into all the changes. Also, I think one of the things that is missing here, and it's similar to ADB, the knowledge architecture, which is not, it's kind of spread out through the organization, and there is what we call a KM coordination group that meets regularly with let's say the senior knowledge management officer, which is Leñada, but has representatives from throughout the organization where there is some kind of coordination in the type of knowledge initiatives and products that are being proposed so that there is more coherence and coordination even internally, and also trying to find partnerships that can also support whatever initiative is being proposed. In the last year or so, with our new associate vice president, who, by the way, has a GCF background and was the lead head of the evaluation office there. So there's a lot of also inter-organizational influence, which is great. There's a greater focus, on what is knowledge standards, the really making it high quality and relevant knowledge. So it's not just about processes or repositories, but really getting out the best high quality, making, bringing to the next level, making knowledge actionable, demand driven, and based on, solid and credible evidence, and also on the curation and making, not only the quality, but also the visual appealing aspect of whatever is delivered. There was a slight revision again in our theory of change, but mostly on the action areas, which were a little bit, let's say, revised, although in principle, the 3 that were identified at the beginning are still there. strengthening learning and use. And again, the focus on the youth, although it was in our original strategy, we see even more and more how important the usage of knowledge. We have been generating a lot, and knowledge, lessons learned repositories and portals or whatever, but having it or seeing it in use is not always systematically seen. That the focus on knowledge flows and making sure that in our new decentralized context, we are working obviously differently and sharing knowledge amongst ourselves differently. So making sure that nothing gets broken in the decentralization. And so what kind of meetings, what kind of infrastructure we need in place to ensure that the knowledge flows even in a decentralized environment. The importance of networks, communities of practice, that's been strengthened, and that was already built into the strategy, which was great. And another point in common with the other presentations was measuring success. So we do have in the strategy some kind of monitoring framework which was based on readership surveys, on client surveys, actually looking at ratings in our projects. We actually had ratings both at design and completion for knowledge management within an operation. So, seeing if those indicators were increasing or not. So we do have some basic indicators, and happy to work on others and see what others are doing as well, because we realize that we can improve in this area. So thank you so much. Over.
Thank you very much, Maria Elena, much appreciated. I particularly appreciate the focus on use, making knowledge useful. So not so much quantity, but quality, and actually how it's being used across the institution. And also the importance of enabling environments and the championship by senior management. Those things stood out to me, and you're right, across all of our presentations, we have common themes and lessons we can learn from each other. What's interesting in yours is that you have, this is the second strategy, you're 2 years into implementation of the second one, and you're still making changes, you're still learning, you're still adapting. So clearly there is no right answer, and it's constantly a progress in making improvements and learning as one is doing. Thank you so much. So now we are at a point where we can have a group discussion. We are over time a little bit, but we do have time, at least 20-25 minutes for questions to our presenters, for commentary. So I'm inviting those who want to say something to indicate that in the chat, so we can enable you to speak, invite you to speak. But please keep your questions or comments to about a minute, because we're quite late. So we would appreciate that from you. Thank you so much. So I'm going to now ask my colleague Ted to see who wants to have a word in chat. If there are any questions, we can start with ADB if you wish, because they're quite late in their time. So maybe we want to give them priority. So please let me know if there are any specific questions. Just if you want to speak, indicate that, and we will. Okay, we have Saeed Shakri who raised his hand and who would like to say someone.
Oui, alors désolé, je vais parler en français. Je ne sais pas qu'il y a une traduction, mais je vais poser la question directe. Sincèrement, pour avoir vraiment les connaissances, ils auront de l'impact sur la population locale. Il faut avoir d'abord la langue, il faut respecter leur langue. Deuxième chose, il faut avoir un mécanisme qui est institutionnel et pas occasionnel. Je demande, est-ce que vous avez déjà un mécanisme que vous avez mis en place qui veille à ce que vraiment si vous voulez, cette connaissance locale est prise en considération? Voilà.
Thank you for this question, Said. Did you have a particular agency you're asking, or you're asking everyone about this? So we can.
À l'ensemble des qui ont présenté ces exposés aujourd'hui.
Thank you. So let's keep that question. I took a note of it. Let's take another question, please. Do we have another question? If not, then I'm going to, yes?
From Severin.
Yes, Severin, go ahead, please. Severin Sindizera.
Merci de m'accorder la parole. Oui, est-ce que vous m'entendez? Vous m'entendez? OK. Très bien. En fait, c'est une bonne initiative d'exploiter les connaissances des projets déjà réalisés. C'est une bonne chose. Mais j'ai une observation, surtout au niveau du côté des peuples autochtones. Bon nombre de projets sont réalisés dans plusieurs pays, mais surtout que les peuples autochtones ont des connaissances particulières qui sont utiles pour la protection de l'environnement, qui pourraient être exploitées aussi pour faire avancer la protection de l'environnement en général. Ça, c'est pour une remarque. De prendre en considération aussi les peuples autochtones au niveau de l'implémentation des projets et aussi de la régir en partenariat entre femmes et surtout entre femmes et les organisations de peuples autochtones d'une manière particulière parce que les peuples autochtones se trouvent dans des réseaux de femmes. Et
Severin, I'm afraid we are unable to hear you properly.
Merci beaucoup. Maintenant, c'est bon? Vous m'entendez? OK, très bien. Si vous m'entendez, je commence encore. La question est d'intégrer la communauté autochtone, surtout dans des projets que FEM réalise dans plusieurs pays du monde entier, parce que les autochtones ont des connaissances traditionnelles particulières qui pourraient avancer la protection de l'environnement en général au niveau mondial. Ça, c'est la première question. Deuxième question s'adresse au FIDA. Souvent, FIDA travaille en intermédiaire avec d'autres organisations qui ne sont pas de peuples autochtones. Pourquoi ils ne travaillent pas directement avec les organisations autochtones? Parce qu'eux aussi, ils ont des connaissances qui pourraient être exploitées, par exemple, les manières des systèmes alimentaires. Et ils ont les manières aussi de gérer sur la base de l'agriculture. Tout cela, ces deux questions, ça concerne FEM et aussi FIDA. Pour les banques, notamment banques, je les invite aussi à soutenir les initiatives de développement, surtout en matière de renforcement de capacité pour cette gestion des connaissances, parce que c'est un élément très important dans la vie de la communauté autochtone, d'élargir, donc de faire un transfert des connaissances de gestion pour épuiser, pour récolter les connaissances aussi qui pourraient être utiles dans vos programmes. Je vous remercie.
Great, thank you so much. Since both questions are related to local populations, I would like to ask our presenters to comment on both of the questions. So the first question was about the language issue and how local populations could actually share knowledge given language barriers, and how there can be institutional mechanisms that can help with this. And the second question was, how do you integrate knowledge that's embedded in the local population and the local communities, especially the indigenous peoples in the various areas that we work in? So I'll first go with IFAD because there was a specific mention of IFAD, and then I'll ask ADB and then GCF to comment on it, please.
Yes, so thank you for the questions. In terms of the work that IFAD does is actually a lot of the approaches and the innovations and the projects that we do are community-driven approaches and working at the grassroots level. So really going in the rural communities and working with the local populations. In terms of institutional mechanisms, IFAD leads the Global Farmers Forum, So bringing farmers from globally, both at HQ every 2 years, but then also having regional workshops every year to get their feedback on what their needs are, what their demands are, how we can partner together. And Indigenous peoples, likewise, IFED has been engaged for several years with Indigenous peoples. Again, we have a Indigenous Peoples Forum. We have an Indigenous People Assistance Facility, which is a grant mechanism that provides actually small grants to Indigenous peoples themselves. And it's the IPAF program is actually led, and whatever projects are implemented and approved are by Indigenous groups themselves. And this is a 3-year program that has been running in the last 10 years and is going into its next phase next year. And we're able to raise additional funds to support the EPAF to make it even bigger. And I think it will get even bigger next year after some of the COP26 consultations. And about 60% of our projects do specifically target and work with Indigenous communities, and a lot of our best results, for example, in Bolivia and Brazil, are actually innovations, traditional knowledge that was used in the projects that were able to make them, let's say, so far successful. But yeah, happy to discuss more, especially on the Indigenous peoples front. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria Elena. ADB already made a comment in the chat, but Susan, did you want to add something in response to these questions?
Yeah, I think it's a very important question, and one where we always struggle with, right? Mostly our knowledge products and work on websites is in English, and in our case at least. So we are quite conscious about changing that and enhancing translations, and also making it more relevant for local context, and work with local partners and civil society organizations or think tanks. So that's definitely the case. The other aspect is, I can see here a question on the indicators, and please, I invite you to visit the Knowledge Management Action Plan online. There is a results framework. The most important one, again, about the maturity of our knowledge management model, the staff perception survey, but we also have transactional indicators and all around 24, 26.
Okay, fantastic. You did more than we asked for. You also answered another question in the chat regarding KM indicators. I'm going to thank you for that. I am going to ask now GCF to see if they have any comments on the local community knowledge exchange challenges, and also the indicators. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Yasemin. And somebody posted in the chat as well earlier that not only we as a secretariat take the issue very seriously, but the board has also established an independent redress mechanism. It's a unit, it's a small team of colleagues who are also headquartered with us in Korea. And the independent redress mechanism, they actually have a roster of translators, making sure that any issue raised on the ground would reach us, in their native language. That's just to remove barriers, related to languages. Of course, this is not to say, the language barrier is not there, but we also do produce material in other than English, other UN languages other than English. And when it comes to Indigenous people, the Secretariat has an ESS team and a specialist of Indigenous people. And we also look into the funding proposals, the requests when they come in, from the perspective of the Indigenous people, to make sure that the proposals have addressed all the concerns related to Indigenous people. So that's basically how we approach both in terms of the funding and in terms of any redress that may be there to address. And there was one minor question from my side to you, Yasmin, if time allows. I wanted to ask you also related to your very initial and very insightful presentation on the learning part. In other settings and in our setting particularly, there is a independent evaluation unit, and Joe was mentioned earlier by our IFAD colleagues. She was setting the independent evaluation unit, and it seems like what you and your team are focusing on is also be part of what independent evaluation units would be doing in other organizations. And I wanted to understand a little bit better whether there is a unit within GEF or on the orbit that also does a bit of learning work from the actual implementation of your projects, or it's just your team? Thank you.
Thank you so much, George. That's a very interesting question. First, thank you for answering the previous questions, and then I'll just move on to your question. You are very right. For a long time, monitoring and evaluation was together in the GEF. So we had a monitoring and evaluation policy where we had monitoring processes and evaluation processes. And in fact, evaluation was part of the GEF Secretariat's work. Then eventually evaluation got separated and became an independent evaluation office. So just like the GCF, we have an independent evaluation office that is separate. It has its own director and its own mandate and reports directly to the council and conducts evaluations in an independent fashion. Just recently, also about 2 years ago, our monitoring and evaluation policy also split. And we have a monitoring policy now that's actually implemented by the GEF Secretariat, and we have an evaluation policy that's actually implemented by the Independent Evaluation Office. We do have in the audience colleagues from the Independent Evaluation Office here today. We've always had their participation in the KM Advisory Group. They are actually the key people who look at project impact. They look at portfolio impact, they look at the country-wide impact of the GEF, and they evaluate our performance in our project. So, I mean, I gave this a quick overview, but if there is a colleague, IEO colleague, for example, Gita, if Gita is connected, or Ksenia, we could ask them and what they do in terms of knowledge management, because they do quite a bit. Do we have in the audience an IEO colleague who could respond to George's question? From the IEO perspective.
It's all right, yes, I mean, we can take it offline. I think this was sufficient. I do see how different parties keep the checks and balances, so I can reach out offline. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we do divide the responsibilities, but both sides have knowledge management embedded in them with various knowledge products. And the IEO has its own website, so you could also take a look there. Thank you.
Jasmine, do we have time? Do we still have time? I see a few questions in chat.
Yes, I was just going to say, who's in line? We can, I think, have 3 more questions or comments. So we have.
Yeah, we have a question from Shobha Kumar.
Yes, this was an indicator question, I believe. ADB responded to that. Do we have IFAD wanted to say anything about the indicators they use in terms of knowledge management to measure success? I think this is something that they're just embarking upon.
Yes, Jasmine, I think I mentioned briefly some of the indicators that we had in place was that of seeing improving the KM scores in our projects, in our country strategies, doing readership surveys, doing an evaluation or client surveys on South-South exchanges and learning across the organization. Those are just a few, but if the strategy has quite a few indicators in it as part of the strategy. If you'd like to refer to it, I'll just put the link in the chat.
Thank you so much. In the chat, I also see two questions from Sana Keskes asking about, what is, who are we building capacity for and on what are the needs, etc. Is there any diagnostic study? If this is for the GEF, this kind of a diagnostic was conducted about 5 years ago when we first started our knowledge management journey. But now we are going to be doing it again, reaching out to all of our stakeholders to do this kind of a diagnostic study for the new GEF strategy development process. There's another question by the same colleague. Is there any youth and gender approach in this KM? Train of the trainer at country level would be very good for sharing, he says. Yes, we completely agree. There should be a youth and gender component. Thank you for pointing that out. Margot Brown from World Bank asked about processes and mechanisms to understand knowledge supply and demand across your organizations. So I would like to ask ADB, IFAD, and GCF maybe to respond to that. What are the mechanisms to understand knowledge supply and demand across your organizations? Susan, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I dropped it already here. Actually, we are publishing a country knowledge programming manual shortly. So that's where you can see what kind of tool we have developed. We now started around 18 months ago, but now intensified this with a new knowledge management action plan to do knowledge demand surveys, where we ask government agencies what actually is their knowledge demand, the current and future one, and then we use future thinking and foresight to also understand better what kind of knowledge demand we are anticipating, what kind of policies they are working on, or what kind of projects and plans. And then we match that with the knowledge supply we have. So by doing this, we impose more rigor across our own colleagues to align the knowledge work we are doing with that of the countries, and of course to also have, I think what we are seeing in Asia is more demand towards collaborative knowledge work. So no one wants to be told anymore. We have fantastic experts here in governments, and they are the best experts actually to share among each other. And we are more of the brokers. And I think Ede had this fantastic analogy where he said it's now really about bringing a whole menu of options, like a Chinese restaurant menu to the clients and say, these are the options we have for you, which ones actually fit best, and then you assemble and put together a relevant selection of, so to say, dishes or a knowledge work. And that's what we are moving towards.
Great, thank you. What about IFAD, Maria Elena? What were the demand and supply?
Demand is basically driven by the country strategies. We see what kind of knowledge is, where are the knowledge gaps, what can be also learned from that particular investment. The supply sometimes is supply driven. Some of the work that has been done in the sense of there are certain topics that IFAD has worked in and that has, let's say, an added value or comparative advantage, where it has worked on actually distilling and harnessing the knowledge that it has, let's say, has gathered within the, in the years of its existence, and it has tried to capture it in some way. So that is, one of the things we still are struggling with, but we are trying to be more systematic. And as I was saying before, in our, let's say, what we have learned is to really be more focused on demand-driven side, actionable side, and the using of the knowledge. So thank you. Over.
Thank you so much, Maria Elena. Now I'm going to give the last word to George at GCF to tell us how do they align demand for knowledge and supply of knowledge. Thank you, George.
Thank you, Yasemin. And I said earlier in my presentation that we should always avoid using, KM jargon, and maybe I shouldn't have said it always, because sometimes we have to use it. So I'm going to now, refer to a concept in the KM that we often use, and it's called pull and push. So it's the same as, supply and demand. And very often we're pulled, and we know exactly, what our stakeholders want. And stakeholders can be countries and in the ground, but they can also be our internal staff. And when I was talking about, teams of excellence, often in our context, stakeholders are internal, colleagues, and we need to keep our finger on the pulse to understand what the demands are there internally. And of course, keep the pulse on the finger on the pulse and understand what the demands are on the ground. Now, having said that, there are known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. Sometimes, our colleagues and our stakeholders don't even know what they don't know. That's only because that's the nature of knowledge. Very often we don't realize what knowledge is out there that we don't possess and what would be, more empowering. So those in the position of knowing what knowledge is available within their realm or in other organizations that could benefit their stakeholders internally and externally should make every effort to make this knowledge available to those, outside of the organization and outside of their team. So that's why these forums, whether they're, interagency, interthematic, or whatever, platforms we have created and we are members of, serve the purpose of sharing knowledge and, letting each other know what else can be brought to the attention of our stakeholders. And very often we all serve the same taxpayers and the same recipients. So it is our job to share as much knowledge as possible in terms of what we can supply our stakeholders with. So that's in a nutshell how pull and push in the KM world works. Thank you.
Thank you so much, George. I loved what you said. Sometimes colleagues don't know what they don't know. And it's very true. So there may not necessarily be demand, but maybe the people are not quite aware that they need to be demanding something. And if there is supply, that may actually wake them up to the fact that they may not know something. So it's an interesting balance between demand and supply. You don't also want to supply a surplus of information which is not useful, which was IFAD's point. We need to make it useful. And also what ADB said about what the governments really need. Maybe they don't want to be dictated, but they want to learn from each other because there's sufficient capacity in certain areas versus others. So these are excellent points and great food for thought. Thank you so much. I am going to move the conversation forward now. I know there are a few comments in the chat, but we are running out of time and it's getting very late in Asia. So I am going to now move forward to Ede's presentation, if you allow me. And we will keep record of the chat and we will definitely respond to any questions that are in the chat, and we will be sharing the chat with everyone. So, and the recording of this session. So do not worry, we will get to you. And with this, I would like to invite Ede to join the conversation. He has gracefully agreed to speak today. He is a former senior director at the World Bank, and he is the CEO and co-founder of Eigen Impact Consulting. You've already seen his bio that was circulated, so I won't go into details, but it's a great pleasure for us to have him with us today. Ede, please take over. It's your turn to speak.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. Let me just first double check that you can see my presentation and you can hear me well.
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So look, I'm talking now after the experts on knowledge management, and I'll be doing a disclaimer. I'm coming not from the knowledge management discipline, but I come from the very practical operational side. So I work at the World Bank for more than 2 decades, and some of my last jobs were on regional director for sustainable development in Africa, and before that, global senior director for cities, climate resilience, disaster risk management, social development. And let me tell you a little bit about when I started that job as senior director. Here at COM, it's been a major restructuring of the organization. I get to lead a team of 700 staff in 90 country offices. I have a massive budget overrun of 20% of my entire budget. The teams are coming together from different disciplines. They don't trust each other. nobody believes that this is a team that can succeed. What do you do? And surprisingly, we decided with our management team, we really need to focus on knowledge management. Why? Because we believe that knowledge management actually was a source of comparative advantage, actually was going to let us survive and thrive into this process. And we had a similar challenge to what GEF has today. First, you have some of the most difficult and wicked global environmental challenges. And really, in development, you're tackling what is at the core of survival for the planet. And at the same time, you have information overload. If you look at just the amount of information that are on the websites on global environmental issues in your implementation partners, is just simply overwhelming. And if you look at the structure of who are you working with as a GEF, you have a good dozen implementation partners, you have almost 200 countries that you're working with, you have donors that are coming from all over the world, and you have local communities, you have active global and local environmental NGOs. Look, the complexity of what you're talking in terms of structures and relations is simply overwhelming. And therefore, one of the challenges that we faced in the World Bank in our teams was that generally KEM was seen in a very traditional approach, meaning on the left-hand side, you see the operational people. They're out there in the field, they are solving problems, they are trying to figure out what policies, what programs, what needs to be done to get the environment to survive and thrive. And then there's a backroom function of knowledge management professionals that are doing their best job, but they're seen out there, they say like, no, knowledge management is their job. It is what they do, and this is what they need to figure out. And then there's a complex web of IT systems and relations and rules in between those two that don't necessarily work as efficiently as you can. So we decided, look, and many of these experiences are going to be in a book that will be published early next year by Routledge on really knowledge management from the management and leadership perspective. Really how knowledge management can be really at the core of a comparative advantage of global organizations, and exactly what groups like GEF and all of the GEF implementation partners can do to really be able to provide much better services to the process. So a few core themes that we use in the process. First, this is not knowledge for knowledge sake. This is knowledge for action. We were decided to work with our teams and say, look, clients, at some point, yes, they are interested about the money that you're bringing, but the World Bank no longer is the big elephant in the room. Even on countries that used to be very dependent on the World Bank, you name it, Kenya, Ethiopia, and the like, once you look at the budgets today, the reality is that what the World Bank and the IFIs are providing is a relatively small proportion of what they're looking at the end is knowledge. Is really what do we do? Actually, not only what do we do, what is it that people are overall doing in these kind of things, and where can we learn from things that have worked and things that haven't worked? And therefore, for our teams was that, look, this is not an add-on to your function. This is core to what you need to do. If you are not up to speed on what is happening everywhere in the world, if you are not able to sit down with your client and tell them these are the options out there, then you're not doing your job. And that message takes a while. It's an important cultural change, but then it empowers people to say, this is exciting. This is what we got into development. This is why you're a global organization like GEF. This is why you're working in country after country after country all the world into this process. Our second message in working in this was that knowledge is there to break silos. And we were very clear from the beginning to say the most difficult environmental, the most difficult development challenges are not just the hyper-specific rural roads projects. Many of these issues have been solved by the countries, and they know how to do rural roads, or they are not really specific on how do you do tax processes. It's really these complex, difficult issues, and what GEF is working today is really on this complex interaction between environment, food systems, pressures, the interaction between cities and rural areas, interaction between climate change and biodiversity fragility. All of those issues actually what require are silo breakers. And actually our communities of practice, we decided purposely to call them knowledge silo breakers to send the signal. Knowledge is not just your own little corner of the world. Knowledge is really all about multi-sectoral solutions into this process. A third dimension that we really were very interested in exploring was that the world is moving so much faster than before. So when Carlos Manuel was talking about PS, payment for environmental services in Costa Rica, it was like, yes, that brings me back to my years working in Latin America and Costa Rica, because it took a while, it took several years for the system to do. It took a while to try to do the evaluation reports of these projects. It took several years to start sharing the lessons. It took mistakes to bring it to other countries. Well, turns out that the environment cannot wait for 10 to 20 years for those lessons to be extracted. The need for speed and the way in which people are connected, the way in which knowledge needs to flow, is orders of magnitude faster than that process. And how do you do that? So we had the same problem. We developed a series of methodologies in the Caribbean on disaster risk management, on financial mechanisms to respond to disasters. It took 7 years to do the projects, to do the evaluations, to write the reports. And then the Pacific Islands began to read about them. It took another 3 years to do new projects. It took 10 years from one cycle to the other. That is just simply unacceptable. And therefore that, for us, the anxiety of knowledge flows, the speed of that was an integral part of being able to serve our clients faster. Literally, the environment cannot wait 10 years for lessons to be transferred from one country to the other. It is over. If you really are not sharing lessons and learning together super fast, the environment is really reaching these tipping points that may not be able to recover. And then the final message to everybody in our team was that, look, knowledge management is not something that the KM team should be doing. It's not their job. Their job is to help you become a better knowledge worker. Everybody in the team needs to be a knowledge worker. Why? Not because you're just giving out, but you become part of a community where what you give becomes part of the knowledge, and then you receive a lot more than what you give. And therefore, that was part of our permanent obsession in the process. Now, we found 4 myths that I talk a lot about on the barriers to these ideas of knowledge management. First myth, look, we have no time. Sorry, we need to deliver our project. We have our end of the fiscal year. These things need to be designed right away. Don't come to me with all this knowledge management nonsense. And we were like, sorry, in the end, if you're not really up to speed on what's happening in knowledge, if you're not doing co-creation with your client, if you're really not being able to be part of a community that is working on similar issues, then you may think that you're moving fast, but in reality, you're making the old mistakes of a generation ago. Therefore, that idea that you cannot be bothered with knowledge because you don't have time is absolutely nonsense. Myth number 2, don't bother me with knowledge management. I know what the client wants. And that happened a lot. I was in the Beijing country office. I come to the China team, and it was a large office. I called them the independent republics. It was the same in Brazil, large offices, they know what to do. They're like, now we know what the client wants. What is it that we need to do to look into other countries? That really is not an issue. We have been working on this. We really know what the client has been working on. Leave us alone with that process. And in reality, once you start unpacking what the clients and the counterparts wanted, actually the Chinese were very clear. It's like, look, we really need the best global knowledge. And actually the best global knowledge is not even regional, it's global. You really need to help us. What is it that Europe is doing into this process? What has been the interaction between some of these regional markets? They were throwing at us really complex issues that were at the frontier of knowledge, not for China, for the world as a whole. And therefore, this idea that I know what the client wants is no longer sensible to this process. Myth number 3, that happened a lot. And they said, we only need to have to fix the IT system. If we can fix the web search, if we can fix the artificial intelligence that is going to extract from all of these reports the knowledge that we need, problem solved. And in reality, it wasn't that way, because knowledge is not something that is just on paper. Knowledge is become the most important part of knowledge is that tacit knowledge, is that experiential knowledge, is that co-creation with your counterparts of what knowledge is all about. What are the solutions into this process? And yes, IT solutions are important. They are necessary, but they are not a sufficient solution into this process. And myth number 4, many people will come and say, no, sorry, Edith, you are a crazy boss. We cannot have it all. You want creativity, you want efficiency, you want quality. We cannot have it all. You need to choose. You want efficiency and deliver fast? We can do that. You want high quality? Then it's going to take us more time into this process. You want creativity? Oh, it's going to be slow. We need it. And I said, no, I'm sorry. I want to have it all. That can you have it all. And at the end, it was all about the knowledge processes that we were setting up in that. And we were obsessed in the end, and we decided it's all about communities. It's all about the interaction of people, and people not only within the organization. It was interaction within people with the organization, the clients, the communities that at the end were the ones that were having a lot of knowledge of what was the problems, but also other organizations working into this process. And we created a process of building these communities of practice. We call them knowledge silo breakers, because most of these communities were cutting across silos, were bringing professionals that were really interested in certain topics. And we had a combination of bottom-up, creative groups of people that wanted to innovate, and top-down, because there were certain directions that we wanted to push the practice to say, this is where we're going on into this process. We had lots of discussion because it was a big cultural change to say, who has the knowledge? And we said, no, sorry, Washington, D.C. doesn't have the knowledge. The bureaucracy of headquarters is a killer. The knowledge is happening really in the country offices. It's really happening in the client offices. It's happening in the communities that are solving these problems. And you need to move from a central model, a spoken hub, where it is the headquarters that has the knowledge, will collect the knowledge, will disseminate the knowledge, to a network. And Susan was really talking about the centralized networking system into this process. That's what we found that was the most effective process. Now, knowledge and innovation became very closely linked to each other. And not because there was a group of people that said, you are the innovators and everybody else needs to learn from those. No, that's not what we did. What we did was the organizations like GEF, in a way, are global labs. And what do I mean by that? You are trying to support countries fixing very similar problems, global environmental problems with very practical local solutions that are a little bit of variations of each other. And therefore, the world doesn't have the time to allow these experiments to grow on their own and then maybe learn to each other. How do you connect in a way that there's this constant exchange of information, that there is the constant comparison of notes, that there's constant learning from each other to move into that direction? And we move from the traditional South-South knowledge exchange to a very active process from retail to wholesale, meaning there were centers of excellence, and we had Medellin as a center of excellence on urban development and social inclusion. We had Barcelona on smart cities. We had Tokyo on a variety of resilient issues. And then we began to create communities of practitioners, not inside the bank alone, but actually with the clients that were going into these places, not only to learn, but actually they were bringing problems and they became peers of each other to compare notes, to say, look, this is what we did in solving that problem. And that dynamic of co-creating solutions from countries around the world, and then they going back to their countries, trying to solve the problems and continue to compare those issues, creating laboratories of learning, experimentation, and solutions that were just bubbling with energy in ways that we had not seen before. Now, it required a lot of cultural change, because in the cultural change from my focus is into lending, and this is what is our mandate, don't bother me with learning. It was a cultural change on diversity. We were surprised that actually a knowledge management strategy that is effective brings very diverse voices from countries all around the world, from groups of people that never felt that they could talk to Washington and say, this is the solution, or you are not making any sense, because knowledge is a democratizing process of finding the solutions, and it's really trying to figure out how to do that. I'll recognize, though, that everybody has failures, and we actually failed about how to talk about failures. Institutions like the World Bank never want to talk about failures, and actually many of our organizations, and all of you, actually had these pressures from your funders that says you cannot fail too much. Okay, you can be innovative, but don't fail too much. And it was really difficult because if you don't talk about the failures, then everything is positive. And clients come and say, so talk me about the mistakes. And what we found is that the written products were all positive and all that. Once we got practitioners talking to each other, that's when the real stories came to be. And actually our team, our knowledge management team, became very good at training knowledge providers in telling the real stories. So we work with Singapore, we work with Japanese cities, so that they would not only say, okay, this is the solution, look how good it is, but actually they would describe the whole political process, all of the vested interests that they had to deal with, all of the pathways, because development is a really complicated issue. Environmental protection is really complicated, and therefore, what are the pathways that they were able to take in order to solve the day-to-day problems? Because in the end, it's not really approving a project. You know well in GEF, we know well in the World Bank that your appraisal document, that the board approval document, in a word, is a little bit of a word of fiction. It's your hope of how things are going to work. But the real lessons are coming from implementation, are coming from the day-to-day of working 3, 4, 5, 7 years on solving problems day in, day out. That is the real knowledge that needs to be extracted, and it cannot be extracted on reports. It cannot be extracted actually on traditional ways. And at the end, it was all about leadership. And we brought knowledge management into the leadership team to be able to do this process. Susan was talking about this knowledge process. I know how much GCF has incorporated, and Yannick taking the lead into saying this is important for the organization. If the leadership is not showing and saying, this is critical, this is how we do, if the leadership itself doesn't show that they're failing and experimenting, then the troops are not going to feel comfortable unleashing their creativity, unleashing their innovation, taking the time to learn from each other, taking the time to really say knowledge is not something that the knowledge management team, knowledge is a business line for all of us. For GEF, it's a fascinating problem because it's not what you do. Reality is what the partnership that you're mobilizing and how you're going to be working with the systems, the knowledge management systems of all of these organizations, and in many cases, the knowledge management systems of the countries that are really trying to develop this process. Indonesia, and I got very inspired when I heard Susan talking about Indonesia, they have fantastic knowledge management systems themselves, because they said the Disaster Risk Management Agency, we need to learn from every disaster what has happened. I think that this is what it is, that the GEF has a unique opportunity to really accelerate knowledge management for solutions, because the environment cannot wait. You have a very small window of opportunity before really important ecosystems break down. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ede, for this
muchas gracias, Ede. Muchísimas gracias, Ede.
Yes, Carlos Manuel. Go ahead.
Yes, but muchas gracias, Ede, por tus palabras de experiencia y sabiduría. Thank you so much, Ede, for your words of experience and wisdom. Highly appreciated. Everything that you said, it really touched a nerve within what we do. And I want to blend or complement what you said with some of my initial remarks with regards to the overwhelming sense of urgency that that we have on top of us. We cannot spend 5 to 10 years to really come up with the learned processes. There is not enough time. But nevertheless, I think if we work together ourselves, because we share most of the big challenges and threats, and we need to respond to the political opportunity. I never in my life seen such a great political opportunity to really do the system change, even though there may be a lot of political costs and challenges. I never seen such a political alignment as of today. And just, having these political commitments at the highest level is wonderful. We didn't have it in the past, but that is not enough for the very specific actions at the very different levels within all different sectors. And this is where the knowledge management can play a huge, big role. So thank you for that, Ed, and thanks everybody as well. Sorry for the interruption, Jasmine. I was really excited to hear Ed, sharing his vision, his experience and wisdom on this topic.
Not at all, Carlos Manuel. You echo my excitement because I completely agree with you. Every point Ede raised resonates strongly with our challenges and opportunities. I want to actually emphasize the myths that you talked about. We face them, each and every one of them, every single day. And it's great that you have raised them. I love the fact that you said knowledge is a democratizing process to find solutions. We completely agree with that. And that's why we think it's so important to move this agenda forward. And we must bring knowledge management into the leadership team of our institution and institutions across the partnership as much as possible. And that we have a limited window to really make a difference right now. So it's very important what you said. So I'm going to now open the floor for any questions and comments for Ede. We have 15-20 minutes, I think, if you can bear with us for some commentary. So if there are already people who want to say something, Christina, can you point us?
Yes, 1 second. There's just well, I don't know if George is still here. He can speak for himself. He says, Ed, such an inspiring and informative presentation. Thank you so much. Great. And then from Mary Jane, ADP, thank you for this opportunity to learn from each other. We'll keep in touch. Good night. I think they went to sleep.
Yes,
anybody
it's
else?
Quite late. Do we have any questions for Ede?
Anybody else?
Okay, it seems like it's getting quite late. We don't have questions, so I would like to move the agenda forward. I'd like to thank Ede for his excellent presentation. And this brings us...
Jasmine, let me just say one final point to Carlos Manuel that I wanted to say in the presentation and it escaped me. And that is the one of the challenges is the short-term memory. So the work that you did in Costa Rica on payment for environmental services has been forgotten by the nature-based solution community in climate adaptation. They are like, how do we finance? How do we get these solutions? How do you measure results? How do you do that? And I'm like, you need to talk to the farmers in Costa Rica, that they know exactly how to do that. And they did this almost 20 years ago. And they're like, well, Costa Rica, but that's all forests and ecosystems. And I'm like, no, that's nature-based solutions into this process. So I think that we go through these cycles of forgetting solutions. And I think that the long history of GEF makes it invaluable to be able to say the new solutions may be very linked to what was the old solutions of the past. It just need to be updated, learn those lessons, learn the difficulties of the political process that you had to do, how to be able to scale up in that direction. Thank you, Jasmine.
Yes, thank you, Ede, for that comment. Actually, that reminds me also of one more point. That's regarding our integrated programs. And if Mohammed is in the audience, maybe he can point out all of the knowledge management components that we have been supporting in the integrated programs. And Ede is, I'm sure, very well aware, especially the cities program, that we are trying not to forget some of these lessons that have already been implemented with GEF funding or with funding from other partners. And through these platforms, the knowledge platforms that we support in our integrated programs, we're trying to get the countries to talk about what has happened in their own portfolios, in their own experience, and to learn from each other. And that's one of, I think, the key innovations in knowledge and learning that we were able to implement in GEF 7, through our IAPs as a pilot and now going forward in the integrated programs. Of course, we have to learn from what we invested in from these integrated programs and see if we can do even better going into GEF 8. I don't know if we have any GEF colleagues who want to comment on this. If not, I'll move on to my presentation.
Yeah, Jasmine, since you mentioned my name, just to also acknowledge the excellent summary overview of what has been a really extensive work that Ade and his team have done. I think to me, the main point is that struck me is the fact that Ade is absolutely right. We don't have to wait 5 years, 7 years for projects to end to be able to learn. And this is one of the major points that we are emphasizing, even with this current ongoing discussion for the GEF 8 replenishment, that we are already learning a lot from the experience with the integrated approach pilot programs, as well as with the design of the impact programs, which is still ongoing. So there's so much that we have gained already in terms of how these programs are coming together, how they're helping the GEF to push the boundaries, both in terms of leveraging its expertise, but also harnessing and crowding in the expertise of the vast number of institutions that we have been able to mobilize and engage with. So I think this organic aspect of the learning process, to me, is one that is really important that we in the GEF Secretariat need to embrace and really internalize. So I just wanted to add to that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed, so much for your contribution. In fact, I wanted to point out to everyone on this call that Mohammed has led an exercise to learn from the IAPs collectively together with all the agencies that were involved. And we have a document that actually summarizes all of the lessons that are coming out, which is actually in itself an excellent knowledge product that can help us do better next time around when we invest in knowledge and learning in our programs. So if there are no other questions, I'd like to move on to the next session with your permission. And of course, any comments in the chat will be shared. A couple of GEF colleagues have already responded to questions in the chat. So please remember to look at that, and we will also share the chat. So if Nico, if we could move on to the rest of my presentation. Thank you. So now that we have heard a mix of excellent lessons and opinions and overviews from agencies and EDE and many interventions from the participants, I'd like to tell you a little bit about next steps in the GEF process, since we are here to really help the GEF out in any way we can, and a couple of the upcoming initiatives. I will keep this very short because we are quite late. So if next slide, please. So in response to the challenge of learning at the country level and facilitating knowledge and learning among our stakeholders, we have initiated a process to develop a community of practice for our focal points. This is to build capacity locally in our countries, recipient countries, and to enable them to be advocates for themselves amongst the constituencies and to be able to communicate and collaborate, exchange information and learn from each other through a knowledge and collaboration platform. We are going to be implementing a pilot with 8 to 10 countries to test the design and implementation of a COP platform together with a collaborative forum. This is based on an earlier GEF investment that we have made in Liberia. The government of Liberia has created an excellent environmental knowledge and learning platform, which we are going to learn from and replicate globally now. So it's great that we can actually take a GEF investment and scale it up. We are very excited about this. And this will be also an opportunity, like I said, for local capacity building, South-South exchange and mentoring of the operational focal points for the GEF. And we hope to facilitate knowledge flow within the countries, across the countries, and across with the GEF Secretariat and the countries. So it should have multi-dimensions. Now, we are, of course, looking for volunteer countries to be the guinea pigs for this pilot. We are already in consultation with a number of countries. So if you're interested, if you happen to be an OFP in this call, please let us know. Next slide, please. This is one of the specific actions that we're working on right now, which is all the process to develop a GEF knowledge and learning strategy. Based on all of our experiences and our consultations thus far, we have come up with some key principles, which I'm very happy to see were echoed today. These were our draft principles. We will finalize them with the information we've gathered today from you. We are very keen on having broad engagement in this process. We want this process to be highly consultative and participatory. We want it to be evidence-based. We don't want to pull information out of the sky. We want it to be anchored in information coming from our portfolio, investment stakeholders, etc. We want the strategy to be practical and utility-oriented. We want it to be used. We don't want it to be just a document sitting on a shelf. We would like it to be responsive to stakeholder needs. So demand versus supply, we want to be able to align that, as was then mentioned earlier. We want to be cost effective because we don't have a ton of money to spend on this. We want to create value. We want it to be informed by industry best practice. So that's why we are calling on to all the people who've done this before and who know what to do. And we, most importantly, we want the strategy to be aligned with GEF 8 replenishment goals, and in fact, beyond if possible. Now, it's a very complicated place, you know, the GEF, as Ede mentioned, and we have many key stakeholders. So consultation is going to be tough, but very critical. And we do need to follow a stepwise process. So to make this evidence-based, we need a KM audit and stock taking of an assessment of GEF knowledge assets as we stand today. We had done it 5 years ago, but things have changed tremendously since then. We have made progress. The world has changed. There's COVID, etc. So we need to do this exercise first. We also need to do an assessment of agency policies, practices, and platforms, because also since 5 years ago, all of our agencies made strides in knowledge and learning. As you saw some examples today, for example, ADB, IFAT, GCF, World Bank, all of these institutions have been working on this issue. So we need to understand what the systems are right now, what are the technical capabilities, can they be connected, can we leverage what the partnership already has in place. The third step will be a collaborative strategy and action plan development process, which will include you, the KM advisory group, all of our key stakeholders, our senior management, and of course, our GEFSEC colleagues. We hope that we will be able to engage all the parties that need to be engaged to the extent feasible. We will then take this discussion to our council, our governing body, and see if what they think and if they will adopt it. And once it's adopted, of course, we need resource allocation. Many of our presenters today mentioned, this is not for free. You cannot do all these things without any resource allocation. So we are going to need to do that. We're going to need to convince our donors that this is worthwhile for us to spend money on. And finally, we need to do a partnership-wide implementation against some performance indicators that we will track. We want to track again for success. Next slide, please. We are on a tight schedule, as Carlos Manuel and both Ede indicated. Time is of essence. We need to make a difference as quickly as possible. Our council asked us for a strategy. We are hoping to deliver this strategy to them. It is quite tight. We have, because of the different stages, we have a sequence of events that must happen before we can get to a good quality product that's actually supported and owned by everyone involved. So we are going to ask for your support. We are going to ask for your inputs. We are going to ask for guidance and collaboration so that we can go through this process and do everything that needs to get done. Next, please. In this process, we need help. So as you might know, GEF Secretariat is quite small. As was mentioned before, I think some of my colleagues here, our KM team is a very small team, and we actually do everything we do in collaboration with the rest of the GEF Secretariat staff and also with our agencies. So for this strategy development process, and in fact, mostly for the initial stages of stock taking, assessment, we are going to be working with a local company who's an expert in these areas called Acute Insight. They have put together this nice team for us who are already knowledgeable about the GEF. They are actually present listening to this conversation today. And they will be reaching out to you as well for surveys or for specific interviews in order to understand your needs, your insights, suggestions, recommendations in this process. So please help us collaborate with them, be responsive, and that way all this information then will be consolidated and presented back to you, and then would be incorporated into the strategy development process. Next, please. So we look forward to your engagement and support, and I thank you very much for your engagement today, for all the presenters, for their excellent presentations, and also to our team here, Christina, who's the host, Ted, who's managing the chat, Nico, who's managing the presentations, all our colleagues, our translators, all the GEF secretary colleagues who helped put this together, and of course, I'd love to thank Paula, my manager, and Francois, director, and of course, Carlos Manuel, our CEO, for their support. And I really do hope that you will follow us, you will join the next meeting, and you will let us know what you think. I will be sharing the recording and the chat and all the presentations with you shortly. And now I'd like to give the floor to my director, Francois, who is going to close the session. Here you go, Francois.
Thanks very much, Yasmin, and good morning, good afternoon, and good late evening to some of you. So thanks for putting up with us at this time. Thanks for attending, and thanks for expressing views and for being, as active participant as time allowed. We know that this will take much broader conversations, and that we are very much trying to create space for that input to come in. Thanks to our colleagues from GCF, from IFAD, from ADB, for sharing their experience going through a similar process and actually taking the time to distillate for us some of their lesson learned and of course some of their live learning as they are in the process, of course, as everybody else, to go for the challenge of implementation of a more ambitious knowledge and learning approach. We have a lot of work ahead of us, and I think it's extremely fitting that we had from Carlos Manuel, an ambitious statement about urgency and about the focus, which is the most important here, the focus on the demand for our knowledge, on the need for our knowledge, which has to do with the operational side of what we do, which has to do with the governments and the communities and the beneficiaries and the holders of knowledge at the country level and involved in interfacing with our projects. And beyond this, as some of the participants said, because when the knowledge is available, it's not just available to the context of a project, it's available in a broader way, right? So I think the focus on the audience of that knowledge effort is very much on the countryside. And I think that came very much, very clearly through our discussion. So the challenge is, how do we make all of those links, right? And I think what we heard today is extremely valuable, both to give us all the wealth of and the richness of experience of what has been tried, together with, in Ede's presentation, giving us a sense of how, in order to come up with a strategy here, we are going to have to call the trade-offs, set the priorities, define the objectives further, and make sure that the resources, efforts, and investments that are going to go into this will be adequately dimensioned and calibrated, right? So that we focus on what can give us, as we said, fast action. We can't wait for 10 years for this to work. And Carlos Manuel has been very clear in how he's setting up ambitions for GEF 8 on the imperative of fast and broader impact, right? Which is dictated by the challenge we're facing. So we don't have all the time in the world, indeed. And we don't have all the time in the world to put the strategy together either. We're trying to make all of this converge by the beginning of GEF 8, and so we have a little bit of time ahead of us to carry these conversations and to come up with principles that will help us to focus, to be pragmatic, to select where we want to head along the lines of the ambition that the GEF is setting in GEF 8. So I'm extremely grateful this morning for the participation of all of you. I am particularly grateful actually for people who intervene to actually remind us repeatedly, and Antonio, Sana, Said, Severin, of how important it is that what we're discussing here, how to put a knowledge approach together, and the learning of our ultimate participants and beneficiaries here, right? I think that's very important, and it's not one way, as they all reminded us. It is very much a two-way street, and it's also a horizontal street in which we want the knowledge from countries to go to other countries in a sort of south-south move, if you will, right? So we have ahead of us a lot of work. Yasmin has summarized. We'll be soliciting your inputs and that of many others across the GEF partnership. Please, if you have afterthoughts on this, reactions, questions, suggestions, do not hesitate to reach out to us. I think what we can benefit from hearing from you goes well beyond what was shared today, but thanks for being with us. Thanks for the opportunity. And we're very much looking forward to having you in that effort to help us calibrate, focus, and conduct it in the most efficient way. Thank you very much again for attending today.
I think you're muted.
Yasmin, you were muted.
I was saying, I'm sorry. I was basically saying thank you again and have a wonderful evening, morning, or afternoon, wherever you may be. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you again sometime. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.